Und jetzt nimmt uns der Regisseur James Benning mit auf eine Reise durch sein Amerika. Mit Filmen, die sich ganz viel Zeit lassen. Jetzt hier in Dreisat.
Richard Wetherill was shot to death in the late afternoon on June 22nd, 1910. He died in the shadows of Chaco Canyon, half a mile below Pueblo Bonito, where the wagon trail began its climb to the mesa top towards Farmington, New Mexico. Chis Chilling Bigay, a Navajo, did the shooting. The first Wetherills to immigrate to America came from England as religious refugees and settled in Pennsylvania during the early days of the American colonies. They were Quakers living hard, simple lives in the conservative pattern of their religious teaching. Richard was born in Chester County, Pennsylvania on June 12, 1858, and reared strictly in the Quaker faith. Within a year, the Wetherill family moved to 411 Worth, Kansas, where they remained for 17 years. There, Richard was schooled in mathematics, history, and geography, and learned to speak German with some fluency. Later, he traded the austere German language for the more delicate-sounding Navajo tongue. In 1876, the family moved again, first to Joplin, Missouri, then to Bluff City, Utah, and finally in 1880, they settled in the tall grasses of the Mancos Valley in southwestern Colorado. There, the Wetherells built the Alamo Ranch, one of the most beautiful and prosperous homesteads in the Four Corners. By now, Richard had a younger sister and 4 younger brothers. On December 18, 1888, Richard Wetherell was the first white man to discover the cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde. While tracking stray cattle during an early winter storm, he rested his horse at a place overlooking a side canyon. Half a mile across, through a veil of lightly falling snow, he saw the ghostly outline of a hidden city. He named it Cliff Palace. With 217 rooms and 23 kivas, it is the largest cliff dwelling in North America. It had housed over 250 people, but was abandoned by 1300 AD. Early archaeologists named the ancient people of the Four Corner region Anasazi. Anasazi is a Navajo word meaning ancient ones or ancient enemies, depending on how it is pronounced. Contrary to the name, the Anasazi were a peaceful people and are not the ancestors of the Navajo. Richard Wetherell became obsessed with the ancient ruins. He and his brothers uncovered everything of significance, selling much of it for profit. By the time they were finished, they had located every cliff dwelling on Mesa Verde. In 1893, Wetherell then led an expedition to Grand Gulch, an inaccessible 50-mile-long canyon in southeastern Utah that snakes its way down to the San Juan River. It is one of the formative sites of Anasazi culture. There, Wetherell found proof of the basket makers, an earlier Anasazi people, the direct ancestors of the classic Pueblo people of Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. They were larger in stature, used woven baskets, but no pottery, and constructed small pit houses that were built partly below ground. On December 12, 1896, Richard Wetherell married Marietta Palmer. After honeymooning in San Francisco, together they led a second expedition into Grand Gulch, and by spring had moved to Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon was the cultural center of the Anasazi for 300 years. Richard moved there to dig in the great houses that lined the canyon floor. Pueblo Bonito was the largest, a 4-story structure with over 900 rooms, completed in 1140 AD. Near the west wall, the Wetherells built a 3-room house that also served as a trading post. About the time of the Anasazi abandonment, the Navajo Indians began to drift into the Four Corners. When the Spanish forced their way north from Mexico, the Navajos resisted, sharply rejecting Spanish culture and religion, except for their horses and sheep. The Navajos incessantly raided the Spanish settlements, and by extension often their Indian allies, the Pueblos. Then the Americans began to move west, and the U.S. government sent Colonel Kit Carson to make the Navajo lands safe and available. Carson and his army, in addition to killing every male Navajo they encountered, burned fields, destroyed orchards, and slaughtered livestock. By the spring of 1864, the Navajos were seriously starving, and most of them surrendered. Over 8,000 people were made to walk 300 miles across the New Mexico desert to a prison camp at Fort Sumner. There they remained for nearly 5 years, during which time hundreds died from malnutrition and disease. In 1868, the Navajos signed a peace treaty that allowed them to return to a small portion of their homeland. Owning very little, they continued to suffer greatly. Finally, 14,000 sheep and 1,000 goats were provided by the U.S. government, 2 animals for every man, woman, and child. The Navajos nurtured their new livestock while going hungry themselves, postponing butchering so the animals could multiply. By 1885, the Navajo herd numbered well over 1 million. These were the Indians that Richard and Marietta Wetherell began trading with in the spring of 1897. Marietta ran the trading post and was the first to learn the Navajo language. She practiced home medicine and treated Navajos that were injured or sick. In return, they embraced Marietta and shared with her the secrets of the Navajo way. When Richard was killed, Her life and the lives of her 3 children were spared because the Navajo thought of her as one of the Dina. Richard Wetherill was able to hire Navajo Indians to do the greater part of the digging at Pueblo Bonito, even though they greatly feared the spirits of the dead. The Navajos worked each day from 5:30 in the morning until 6 at night and were paid $15 a month. When the work ended that summer, 37 rooms had been cleared and a freight car full of artifacts was shipped to the American Museum of Natural History in New York. The Wetherills spent the summer of 1904 exhibiting at the St. Louis World's Fair. They built a replica of an ancient cliff dwelling and employed 30 people to sell Anasazi artifacts and handmade Navajo goods. With them, they brought along 60 Navajos to put on display. Then, on June 8, 1906, the Antiquities Act to preserve prehistoric ruins from vandalism and unauthorized search was passed by Congress, and Richard and Marietta had to rely again on ranching for their livelihood. In the year of 1910, a number of stories circulated about Richard Wetherill. Some said he had been rustling cattle. Others said he had been frightening delinquent Navajos into paying their debts by terrorizing them with Anasazi skulls. And another concluded that if Wetherill was dealt with properly, those that had debts would be free and clear. The morning of the day Richard Wetherill was killed, one of his cowboys had beaten a Navajo man to near death. The Navajo had earlier taken a thoroughbred colt that belonged to Wetherill's daughter. Later that afternoon, Wetherill and the cowboy were moving a herd of cattle to graze the North Mesa. The land had already been promised to the Navajos for their sheep. Chiz Chilling Begay fired his rifle. The first shot missed the cowboy. The second shot tore through Richard Wetherill's raised right hand and continued into his chest. He fell from his horse. The third shot from point-blank range tore away the right side of his brain.
My father bought our house in the fall of 1943. At the time, he was working at the Falk Corporation as a laborer assembling landing gear for World War II bombers. He worked the third shift. During the day, he tore out the walls of our new home and completely redesigned and rebuilt its interior. 8 months later, we moved in. I was a year old at the time. Milwaukee had to be a strange place during World War II. My family had moved to America 3 generations earlier. They came from Germany like most of the other families in the neighborhood. We had no real ties back to the old country, but many of our neighbors did. Some of them were sending their sons to kill their cousins, and the other way around, too. Our neighborhood was built in the early 1900s. By 1950, it was a poor German working-class community. Most of the men worked in the industrial valley that separated Milwaukee into north and south sides, or they worked one of the 50 local breweries, while the women stayed home raising the children. 20 blocks to the east was Milwaukee's modest black district. The people there worked mostly as unskilled laborers or low-paid domestics. At an early age, I was taught to fear that community. Ages ago, this region was covered with water of unknown depth. In time, the water found its way to the sea, and a heavy bed of drift formed a plain. A period of erosion followed, cutting the valleys nearly as they are today. Then the Ice Age leveled the summits and deposited more varied and fertile soil. Today, 150 feet of rich earth covers the Niagara limestone and Cincinnati shale that lies below. When the glaciers receded, some of the ancient Paleo-Indians began to settle in this area. They became the woodland Indians that left behind effigy burial mounds shaped like lizards that can still be seen today. In 1634, French fur traders were the first white men to arrive. They traded with both the Menominee and Potawatomi Indians. In 1776, America began, and by 1848, through fraud, retaliation, and sale, the Wisconsin Indians lost all their land. That same year, Wisconsin became a state. The Black Hawk War of 1832 was the last attempt by the Wisconsin Indians to fight against American encroachment. But within a year, the Indians ceded all the lands west of the Milwaukee River. With a population of 200, the town of Milwaukee was created on March 17, 1835. The Potawatomi remained living along the northern cliffs of the Menominee River Valley until 1838, at which time the government drove them out forcefully. In the spring of 1839, the largest and most remarkable land sale in the history of the Federal Department of Public Lands was held. Corrupt speculators who had defrauded settlers elsewhere as America blindly made its way west met resistance from a group of Milwaukee homesteaders that had formed a claimants union. Every parcel of land was sold to the rightful owner at a minimum statutory price of $1.25 an acre. The population of Milwaukee grew to 20,000 by 1850, due mainly to the large number of German intellectuals and liberals who had left their homeland after the unsuccessful German Cultural Revolution of 1848. By 1900, Milwaukee was in a way a more representative German city than any in the Reich, for no city there had so many Germans from all parts of the empire living together in one place. In the 1880s, Polish immigrants fleeing persecution from Tsarist Russia and Imperial Germany began settling together in small church communities on Milwaukee's south side. The Menominee River Valley separated them from the larger German community a few miles north. Heavy industry would later fill the Menominee River Valley, providing employment for both Germans and Poles. Milwaukee's black ghetto did not emerge until post-World War II. When we moved into our house in 1944, there were less than 3,500 blacks living in Milwaukee, about 0.5% of the total population, and nearly all of them lived together crowded in a 24-block area on the near north side. Today there are over 200,000 black residents living in the city of Milwaukee. At the turn of the century, the city annexed the farms of Robert Brown and Bill Sarno, and my neighborhood was born. Our house was built upon an old apple orchard in 1905. Washington Park opened that same year just a few blocks to the west. Geese still stopped there to rest and feed during their semi-annual migrations. As a young boy, I played baseball in Washington Park all summer long. Blacks from the Corps, which the Black District was now called, fished for carp in the park lagoon. At an early age, I was warned to stay away from them. People in my neighborhood had little contact with blacks, yet there existed a great hatred and fear. I was told they were no good, that they even smelled different. Slowly, the Corps grew into my neighborhood. By 1989, my mother was the last white person to move out. She sold the family home for $5,000, the same price my father paid 46 years earlier. My old neighborhood at 39th and Lisbon now centers the worst poverty in Milwaukee. About a third of the houses are either gone, partly burnt, or boarded up. Aluminum siding has been torn from many of the houses as high up as can be reached and sold for scrapyard money. Drugs and prostitutes can be bought openly on the streets. In 1910, a socialist government came to power in Milwaukee. It advocated public ownership of all utilities and low-cost housing for workers. Milwaukee had a socialist mayor for the next 50 years. Local labor organized. In 1934, more strikes were held in Milwaukee than any other city in America. Wages increased, but white workers feared their gains would be lost to low-wage black labor. Labor leaders desired to keep Milwaukee white and discriminated against blacks through exclusionary clauses. The small black district remained segregated and poor. By 1967, Milwaukee blacks were fighting for their civil rights. Father James Groppe, a radical white Catholic priest, helped lead the way. For 200 consecutive days there were marches and rallies. I was one of a handful of white people that walked along. During a night march to Milwaukee's all-white South Side, I was beaten unconscious in Kosciuszko Park by a number of poor white kids. Others were hospitalized. A month earlier, a black uprising had occurred on the near North Side. Most of 3rd Street was set ablaze and gunfire was exchanged. There was one fatality. Brian Mouche, a childhood friend from my old neighborhood and now a rookie cop of less than 1 year, was killed by a sniper's bullet. He was on duty at the time. Few of the blacks living in my old neighborhood own their own homes. Landlords make little or no investment except for the low purchase price, and the properties are consuming themselves. Every last drop of blood is being drained from my old neighborhood's soul. In time, the poor will be moved out, the few remaining buildings will be razed, and the rich soil will again be exposed and exploited.
20,000 years ago, an early people followed the giant mastodons across the Bering land bridge from Siberia to Alaska. Over the next 1,000 years, they spread across the New World. Then the advancing glaciers subsided. The large animals died off. Migration decreased. Distinct cultures began to develop, born of environment, experience, and circumstance. In the southwest, much of the culture came north from Mexico. Around 2000 BC, a primitive form of corn was introduced. Later came squash and beans. The tending of crops caused migration to lessen further. About the time of Christ, extended families began to settle in the four corners. They built shelters, partly underground, partly above, made of mud and roofed with small sticks. Tightly woven yucca fiber baskets were used to transport water. The people painted figures on the canyon walls and pursued a life that united them with the landscape. By 600 AD, they began to live in stone houses. First single-room, single-story structures, then later abutted rooms sharing one or two common walls. Circular underground chambers were also constructed, accessible only through a small hole in the roof. An opening in the floor gave entrance to the sacred world below. The people banded together, living shared lives. Methods of agriculture improved. Cotton was woven into fabric. Jewelry was made from turquoise. Pottery was introduced from the south. Designs were inspired by both the natural and spiritual worlds. Trade was extended 800 miles to the west. By 1000 AD, their center was Chaco Canyon. 7 large houses were built along the canyon wash, the greatest, consisting of over 1 million fitted stones, took 150 years to complete. It had 32 ritual rooms. The largest was 52 feet in diameter. There were over 900 rooms, and it housed almost 2,000 people. Specially placed doorways and angular windows tracked the sun's changing position on the horizon. A complex irrigation system was made to trap and divert water. Farming thrived. Outlying houses were constructed in all directions. 500 miles of roads were built, all straight and true, regardless of terrain. In the night, signal towers spoke with fire. The population grew and the people lived in peace. Then came a severe decline in the summer rains. At the height of its influence, the people abandoned Chaco Canyon, scattering in all directions, some to Montezuma Valley or Sagi Canyon, others to Canyon Dashai or the Little Colorado. By 1150, Chaco Canyon was empty. 80 miles north at Mesa Verde, the people left the mesa tops and climbed down the canyon walls, returning to the ancient site of their ancestors. There they built great houses in the guarded alcoves that provided shade in the summer and direct sunlight in the winter. The honey-colored cylinders, cubes, and towers embraced the landscape. Contact with the earth and the sun was renewed. Then in 1273, the rain stopped again and the people moved on. They left Mesa Verde and Montezuma Valley. They left Canyon Dashai, and the few that had returned to Chaco Canyon left again. By 1300, all were gone, never to return. Many of them traveled southeast and settled along the Rio Grande, where they became the Tawa and the Caris. The people from the Little Colorado moved east and became the Zuni and Acama, while the people of Sagi Canyon went south and joined the people already at Oraibi and Walpi to become the Hopi. During the Exodus, the people found help by way of the Kachinas, supernatural spirits from the underworld, who negotiated with the gods to bring rain, good crops, and health to the people. Then in 1533, Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire and all of Mexico was claimed for Spain. 7 years later, Coronado led soldiers on horseback north to Zuni. It was the first time the people had seen the horse. The soldiers stormed the Zuni village, looting and raping at will. From Zuni, they rode northeast, massacring the entire village of Tiguas. By 1600, the people submitted to Spanish rule and were made to adopt Christianity. Churches were constructed using forced labor. The rains stopped and the corn died in the fields. A priest was poisoned at Awatubi. The people fought to keep their faith alive. In the beginning, life was created in a vast underworld of sea and earth by two female deities that housed the sun. But when Spider-Woman also created life, the people began to quarrel and the crops failed. A new place had to be found. Shirik flew high above the underworld clouds and found a hole leading out. Chipmunk then planted a reed that grew quickly to the world above. Only the good people climbed out. Eagle and swallow stood guard. Mockingbirds showed them where to live and gave them the languages they were to speak. Spanish brutality continued. 47 Kachinas were accused of promoting idolatry and jailed. A number of medicine men were publicly hanged. Native rituals were forbidden. Warriors at Acama had their right foot severed to further control. Finally, in 1680, the people revolted. 18 priests were killed. At Oraibi, the Hopi completely demolished what they called the slave church. Every stone was carried away. The Spaniards fled back to Mexico. Then a new people began to drift onto the Hopi mesas. The Hopi people fed and sheltered them. The new people called themselves the Dina. The Hopi people taught them to farm. The Dina watched closely and copied many of the Hopi rituals. Later, the Spanish named the new people Navajo. The Hopi people called them Tasavu, meaning head pounder, for the way they killed. In 1692, the Spanish returned with promises of forgiveness and gifts of sheep, cattle, and horses. 70 pueblos submitted to Spanish rule, including the Hopi village of Awatubi. It was October, and the first of the great ceremonies of the annual cycle was to begin. The Awatubi chief led a band of armed Hopi men toward his own village. By morning, most of the 800 inhabitants were dead. For the next 150 years, the Hopi people successfully resisted the Christian church. With the introduction of the horse, the Navajos began to dominate. They spread across the four corners, settling near the places where the people used to live. Navajo raiding parties attacked the pueblos from the Hopi mesas to the Rio Grande. Then in 1810, Mexico declared its independence from Spain, and in 1848, the United States overran a weakened Mexico and took half of its land. The Four Corners were now under the jurisdiction of the United States. The Americans joined the Navajos in intruding on Hopi land. In 1882, the U.S. government responded by creating a 2.5 million acre reservation for the Hopi people. 100 years of federal broken promises and illogical decisions followed. The Navajo and Hopi peoples were continually kept at odds to help profit the settling of the West. The discovery of gas, oil, and coal further complicated matters. In 1974, the Hopi people lost one-third of their reservation to the larger, more powerful Navajo nation. In 1981, Navajos living on Hopi lands for more than 6 generations were forced to relocate. No adequate solution has yet been found.
Today, with a population of 38,000, Farmington, New Mexico is the largest city in the Four Corners. Its derelict bars are gone. Main Street now caters to businessmen, tourists, and Navajos with money. Little of its early Spanish or Old West ambience remains. The city keeps expanding, mainly to the east, away from the Navajo Nation that it borders. In 1870, with the exception of a few Mexican settlers, the land where Farmington is now located was inhabited only by roaming Indians. The Navajos named it Tota, meaning among the waters, for the La Plata and the Rio de los Animas rivers empty there into the San Juan. To the north, the land climbs in mesas, producing rich grasslands ideal for raising livestock. Large natural deposits of gypsum yield a permanent fertilizer, and the bottomlands, averaging about a mile in width, are of a rich, dark alluvial soil. There is evidence that the Anasazi cultivated these lands extensively in ancient times. By 1875, about 50 people began to settle between the rivers, and the first store and post office opened. At the turn of the century, Benjamin and Frederick High, wealthy New York manufacturers, built a bank, a warehouse, and a fruit processing plant in Farmington. Richard Wetherill regularly came up from Chaco Canyon and managed the Hyde's business interests. In return, the brothers invested in Wetherill's exploring expeditions and were the ones that kept the profits. In 1910, Chischilling Begay was arraigned in Farmington for the murder of Richard Wetherill. 2 years later, he was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to serve 10 years in the state penitentiary. During the trial, Begay testified that Wetherill fired the first shot. Range wars and Indian scares threatened Farmington until it was incorporated as a town in 1901. Its main business interests at the time were growing fruit and raising cattle. Farmington remained a small rural farming community until the 1950s, when it began to promote itself as the energy capital of the West. Coal, gas, and petroleum were found in the Four Corners, including large deposits on Navajo land. Even though developing these resources was in direct conflict with Navajo spiritual beliefs, tribal elders granted long-term drilling leases to non-Navajo developers and agreed to the building of coal-burning power facilities. Money was paid to the Navajo Nation, but nowhere near what it deserved, and the amount of pollution generated is devastating. Few of the energy companies conducted job training programs for Navajos as promised, and workers poured in from Oklahoma and West Texas. Farmington quickly grew tenfold and shared little common ground with its Navajo neighbors. In fact, the majority of Farmington's white population knew nothing of the Navajos, except that they could be found most any day drunk in the alley behind the downtown bars. Herman Dodge Bentley, born in 1940 and known as Benjamin or Benji, was raised in a hogan halfway between Farmington and Shiprock. He was brought up with traditional Navajo beliefs and attended an off-reservation government boarding school in Brigham City, Utah. In the summers, he returned home and worked looking after his grandparents' sheep. When Benji turned 15, Father Eugene Botello invited him to live at the San Juan Mission, and he became a Christian. That same year, he enrolled at Farmington Central Junior High School, and later traveled with the church to see the Statue of Liberty, Lincoln Memorial, and Washington Monument. As a young boy, Benji showed artistic talent and spent time drawing the wildlife of the Desert West. In high school, he was the only Navajo on the basketball team and led them to a championship in 1957. During his senior year, his studies deteriorated, and he dropped out of school when the basketball season ended. At the age of 20, with the help of a tribal grant, he moved to Chicago and studied mechanical drafting at the Allied School of Technology. He was one of their top students. Upon graduating, he looked for work but was always turned away. Finally, out of frustration, he returned to the reservation. There he found odd jobs, fixing cars, painting houses, laying bricks, but nothing permanent. Then Benji began to drink. Alcohol is not allowed on the Navajo reservation, so those having that desire drive to Farmington to frequent the bars or drive-through packaged liquor stores. Benji hung out behind Harry's Lounge drinking Tokay wine and talking with friends. In the summer of 1966, he met Rena Yazzie that way. Rena's old car broke down near where Benji was drinking, and he found the trouble and fixed it. 2 weeks later, they went on their first date, and by the fall, they were married at the tribal headquarters in Window Rock. By that time, Benji had left the Christian church because of, as he saw it, its presumption of cultural superiority. Rena had 4 children from a previous marriage, and Benji treated them well. He loved them as his own children and sang them Navajo ceremonial chants. He taught them to have a kinship with the land and nature, and to maintain a balance with all things to prevent illness and evil from happening. But he continued to drink. At first, Rena didn't say a word. He never abused her when he was drinking, and if he came home drunk, he'd sleep it off in the junked car out back. But it got worse. He told her he didn't drink to feel good, just to feel normal. Then Rena got pregnant and hoped he'd somehow find it in himself to quit. But it got even worse. He stayed drunk for weeks, and finally Rena left. On April 21st, 1974, Benjamin Benally, at age 33, was found dead north of Farmington in Chokecherry Canyon. He had been beaten to death. His blood alcohol level showed as .444 in the autopsy report. Rena arranged for him to be buried in the Navajo cemetery behind San Juan Mission. 10 days later, 3 white teenagers from Farmington High School were arrested for triple murder. 2 more dead Navajos had been found. Rolling drunk Indians had become a coming-of-age ceremony in Farmington. It was openly condoned, and teenage boys bragged about breaking an arm or sending one to the hospital under critical. There was an attitude conducive to treating drunk Navajos not like people, but like things. Matthew Clark, 15, and Delray Ballinger and Howard Bender, both 16, were tried as juveniles. And Judge Frank Zinn sentenced all 3 youths to the New Mexico Boys' School at Springer not to be held past their 21st birthdays. All 3 were released within 2 years. The day after the sentencing, Farmington went ahead with its annual Sheriff's Posse Parade. Marching up Main Street leading the parade were the veterans of foreign wars carrying American flags, followed by rodeo queens, candidates for public office, and a National Guard tank. Taking up the end was a mounted unit reminiscent of Kit Carson's 19th century cavalry. The riot ensued, and by nightfall, 50 Navajos were arrested and jailed.
DJ, acto. Acto, blues ain't no new news about who's been abused. For the blues is as old as my stolen soul. I sang the blues when the missionaries came, passing out Bibles in Jesus' name. I sang the blues in the hull of the ship, beneath the sting of the slave master's whip. I sang the blues when the ship anchored to dock, my family being sold on a slave block. I sang the blues being torn from my firstborn, and hung my head and cried when my wife took his life and then committed suicide. I sang the blues on the slave master's plantation, helping him build his free nation. I sang the blues in the cotton field, hustling to make the daily yield. I sang the blues when they forced my woman to bed. Lord knows how I wish you was dead. I sang the blues on the run, ducking the dog and dodging the gun. I sang the blues hanging from the tree in a desperate attempt to break free. I sang the blues from sun up to down, cursing the master when he wasn't around. I sang the blues in all his wars, dying for some unknown cause. I sang the blues in a high tone, low moan, loud groan, soft grunt, hard funk. I sang the blues on land, sea and air, about who, when, why, and where. I sang the blues in church on Sunday, slaving on Monday, misused on Tuesday, abused on Wednesday, accused on Thursday, Friday live on Friday, and died on Saturday, still no singing the blues. I sang the blues in the summer, fall, winter, and spring. I know showing up the blues is my thing. I sang the backwater blues, rhythm and blues, gospel blues, St. Louis blues, crosstown blues, Chicago blues, Mississippi goddamn blues, the Watts blues, Harlem blues, Ho blues, gut bucket blues, funky donkey blues. I sang the up north cigarette cough blues, the down south strung out the